you've got to take ownership of your advancement in your career. And it's funny you talk about the work-life balance. I think it's achievable, but the reality is you're going to have to spend more hours of the day doing stuff. Mm-hmm. You can't just start at 8 and end at 5 and expect for all that stuff to fall into place. You're going to have to do stuff outside of work hours to get yourself prepared to take on the next responsibility, whatever that is, whether it's starting a business or taking the next step inside a company.
Welcome to the Matthews Mentality Podcast. Today we are honored to have Scott Reed, the founding CEO of Oakworth Capital Bank, with us. Scott is a man of faith, a devoted husband of 29 years. That's a long time. 29 years. Yeah. I think I'm going, oh no, my wife's going to kill me. I'm 16 years from me. There we go.
Yeah.
And proud father of 3 children. After spending 16 years with Regions Financial and First Alabama Bank, Scott founded Oakworth Capital Bank, where he has served as the founding CEO since its inception in 2008. Oakworth Capital Bank has been named the best bank to work for 6 years in a row. As of December 2023, Oakworth had $1.6 billion with a B, in total assets, $1.2 billion in gross loans, $1.4 billion in deposits, and $2 billion in wealth and trust assets under management. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Did you drive up this morning?
I did.
And you're in Birmingham?
Birmingham, Alabama, yes.
That's right. What is that, about 3 hours?
About a 3-hour drive, yeah.
And are you from Birmingham originally?
Born and raised.
How is it down there?
Love it.
It's
very similar to Nashville, actually.
In like kind of the energy and how it's changing, I guess?
Not so much that way, but the sensibility of the people is very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what, to a degree, drew us to Nashville. We moved to 2019, and we were looking for that. I love the word sensibility, right?
Right.
But we also wanted kind of like, a little city energy, and Nashville was a good, compromise in that sense. But, I hear great things about Birmingham, and there's been a lot of, I would say, investment, certainly from a real estate perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Birmingham is certainly not as dynamic as Nashville, but it does have some positive momentum, and it's a great place to raise a family.
And you're 3 hours closer to the beach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've made that drive many times down to 30A.
30A, absolutely.
Have you spent a lot of time down there?
We have a place down there, and it's just, it actually grew up around us. When we first started going down there, we were the only place down there. Huh. And so Alice Beach and Seaside and Rosemary, all that has popped up around it, and it's a bustling place now.
I had a house down in 30A. I'm not going to make this about me, but I am for about 2 minutes. I had a house down in 30A in this little development. It was like 50 lots and a beautiful home. And, I'd like to think I've done well, but when I wasn't staying there, I'd rent it because, hey, subsidize the mortgage.
Absolutely.
And the HOA, they banded together. Tyranny by the majority, they banded together and took away my right to rent the property. And then I said, well, I'm going to sell this, and bought a house in Colorado. But my wife and I loved our time down there. But anyway, it is crazy what's going on down there. But are you guys active in the lending space in 30A, or is it?
No, we're really not what I would call a transactional real estate shop. Mm-hmm. And so we don't do a whole lot down there.
So tell me, give me a day in the life of the CEO of a bank. Like what keeps you busy? What do you focus on?
Oh, wow. A great question. Obviously it's a dynamic environment right now. And so with the drastic increase in rates, and now obviously rates are beginning to fall, there's a lot of discussion around capital and balance sheet management. Yeah. And we're a growing organization. And so there's a lot around culture, and just how to continue to expand our style of doing business without losing what brought us to this level of success.
I'm going to ask you a loaded question. How do you do that? How do you grow? Because I get this question a lot here.
Right.
Like, how do you grow, but hold on to in your and I's maybe humble opinion, what made you special?
Right. Great question. I think you have to understand what elements are present that make you who you are. In our case, we have a very defined set of values. We're very clear on our purpose and the vision about where the business is headed. And then we have to be very clear about what we do, the experience that we deliver. I'll call that our business model. And then the third part that we think is super important is our ability to replicate that experience over and over and over. And the way we tackle that is through process. And so we are almost maniacal about focusing on what we do well and what we can do better. And we take good notes about what people appreciate, and we try to repeat that. And if people don't like something we do, we try to turn it into a positive, or we get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so really understanding all of those, having a very clear picture of what that is, and then creating the infrastructure around that to maintain that as you grow, I think it's super important.
And I will later in this conversation focus on values and purpose, but I touched on who or kind of what is Oakworth today in terms of size and scale, but like you said where we are headed. Where are you guys headed?
Well, this is going to sound bold, but we take it very seriously. We want to be an iconic brand. And when we think of an iconic brand, we think about what people's expectation of their experience is going to be. So we've studied companies like Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, Ritz-Carlton, and that's what we want to be. We want to be a name that when somebody says Oakworth, it creates an expectation of what your experience is going to be when you interact with us.
There's a podcast I heard recently. I can't remember the name of the podcast. I think it's pretty big. But speaking of iconic brands, a little different customer base than Chick-fil-A, Hermes.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was just a focus on the history of the company and how it became an iconic brand by just a total obsession in terms of quality and the experience and the consistency of excellence. And it was a long podcast. I didn't know much about Hermes. I knew it was expensive and, might have bought my wife a bag every now and then.
Right.
But like I left there not only blown away by the history, but like inspired to be better in my role. And I'll try and think of the name of the podcast later, and I'll text it to you or something. But that's a good one to listen to. Now, some kids grow up saying, I want to be an astronaut or I want to be a professional athlete. A lot of kids say, I want to make bank. You actually made a bank. You ever heard that?
I've not heard that, but that's a good way to put it.
I want to hear, like, as a kid, why don't you walk me through kind of what was life like growing up in Birmingham? Yeah, tell me a little bit about your family, kind of the dynamic of growing up. And then I'm going to lead that into, was this something that you always saw yourself doing one day, getting into banking? But let's start when you're a little, like, what were you like?
You can look at me now. I'm 5'9" and soaking wet. I weigh about 170. But I actually wanted to be a pro football player.
Yeah.
I knew that was going to happen for me, and my parents didn't have the heart to tell me that I didn't have the DNA for it.
Well, hold on. Are you Alabama or Auburn guy?
I'm an Auburn guy.
All right.
I'm an Auburn guy.
War Damn Eagle.
Yeah, War Damn Eagle.
We were just talking right before we came in here. We were just kind of talking, and somehow SC got brought up, and he was like, wait, were you on the team when you came down to Auburn? I was like, yes, sir. My senior year, first game of the year, we came down to, is it Jordan Hare?
Yes, it's Jordan Hare, and I got to tell you this, all of us from Alabama, summers are hotter than in Alabama, and we just knew we were going to get you California surfer boys to Alabama, and y'all were going to wilt in the heat, and you guys just carved us up that day.
Smashed you.
Yeah, you did. That was disheartening.
Yeah, I think I remember walking to the stadium and I saw you, and you had face and body paint all over. I think you threw like a beer. Was that you?
Did it hit you, or did it just come close?
I got some good head movement. No, it was a good game. You guys were so talented individually. We were too, and there was a toughness to our team thanks to the coaching staff and how we practiced and played. But all the credit to Pete Carroll and that staff, the schemes, that was one of those games from the scheme side. We kind of knew going in that you guys were going to have trouble figuring us out. I was on defense. Offense, I was less involved, of course, but we knew our zone blitz scheme would be hard, and I think we sacked you guys 9-10 times.
Oh, yeah. You made us look like a high school team that day. You guys had some talent.
So a little bit.
We were joking when you walked in. There was an
yeah.
unknown guy named Matt Leinart at quarterback.
Yeah,
and,
who's that?
sort of
Reggie,
semi-known running back named Reggie Bush.
Reggie Bush, Lindell White, Mike Williams.
Oh
I mean, they were all on that team. It was a good team.
Yeah,
it was a good team. Good enough to where I didn't get to play very much, but that's okay. Got into real estate, baby. It worked out. But all right, so you wanted to be a football player. You're Auburn guy, and what happens at that point?
So I'll say this. So I grew up in a family. I have a brother who's 2 years older than I am, and awesome childhood. My parents were just absolutely phenomenal parents. I joked, that my parents didn't have the heart to tell me I was never going to play in the NFL, but they let me dream for a little while, and I figured it out on my own. Played sports growing up, was just competitive. I mean, my parents thought there was something wrong with my brother and I. I cannot tell you how many times that we got calls from our neighbors. We'd be out playing pickup basketball in the yard, and you can imagine how that
It would
went.
turn into a fight.
Oh yeah, constantly.
I know that story.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did that until my brothers got bigger than me. Then I was like, dude, stop. What are you doing? Grow up.
But yeah, so I mean, you grew up. When you grow up playing sports, you learn how you learn how to be a teammate. You learn how to compete. And what I've always said, I love athletes because if you've had any level of success, you've been humbled before because everybody's been on the field that has with somebody that has a lot more talent. You've taken coaching, which is hugely.
That is the big one.
Huge. So if when I find somebody that has that in their background, I know at least they've had that exposure, and that's always a big positive in my estimation. So anyway, I just had a very normal childhood. Played sports through high school. You'll never guess what sports I played and what positions I played.
Let me guess, you were the center on the basketball team?
I was not the center on the basketball team. You probably pick what position I played in basketball. So I was a point guard and a middle linebacker.
Middle linebacker.
Yeah. And so
there's a hammerhead just filling the hole. Boom.
Just I had the mentality for football and nothing else.
That's good.
So what I made up for in lack of size, I made up for in slowness.
Well, and throw in a little heart, right?
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
You touched on coaching real quick. The humbled of absolutely competition. Yes. But the coaching, man, that is so critical. Because I tell my kids, I said, the difference between like coaching and criticism. I said, not much. I said a coach just is going to criticize because in the hopes and the desire to make you better. I said a critic is just going to criticize. They don't really care if it makes you better or worse. And so when you're coached and you've spent time in sports, and obviously the higher the level, my experience was the more intense the coaching. You have experience, and you have an acceptance going into your professional life. And let me know if you disagree, and whether it's banking or real estate or anything, where when you get coaching, right, whether from your manager or your boss, it kind of comes in the way of criticism, but you don't fall apart. You're not like, oh my gosh, like I'm not perfect. They're being mean. They're like, okay, like. You may or may not disagree, but it's not the first time you've really been introduced to being told you're not perfect, which is so important for someone's ability to, I say there's two types of coachability. There's number one, the ability to receive the criticism, and the second type of coachability is the ability to apply it. And if you can do both those things, receive and apply, you're probably going to do pretty well.
Absolutely. And we talk about this a lot at our company. I mean, nobody is perfect. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. And we talk about the earning the right to coach. And we talk about the idea of trust being the element that has to be there. And so I remember I had this experience with my son, was playing high school football, and he came in one day and said, "Dad, the coach, I hate that guy, man. He's all over me."
We all have that moment.
And I said, you got to realize that. I said, "Hey, do you trust him?" "Yes, sir, I do. He's a good person." I said, he sees more. He thinks you've got more in the tank, and that's why he's all over you, is because he expects more of you. Anyway, just so I'm a big believer that you got to receive coaching, and when you're in the situation where you need to provide feedback, you have to have earned the trust. in order to have the right to do that.
My safety coach at SC, Dennis Thurman, my freshman year, he was on me, and I just finally kind of snapped one day. I was like, why don't you just tell me you want me to transfer out of here, quit, and kind of call me over. And he's like, son, man, you got it totally backwards. He's like, you shouldn't be mad if I'm coaching you hard. He's like, because I think that you could be a pretty good player, and it's my job to get the best out of you. He's like, you should actually worry when I stop coaching you, because that's when I've given up. And I was, even at 18 and as much of a knucklehead as I was, that was one of the few moments where I was like, well, I guess that makes sense,
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're a high school middle linebacker, right? Yeah. What were you like as a student? Because like I'm clichéing, stereotyping a banker, very disciplined, very studious. Like, is that true? Were you always like that? Is that something that kind of turned on later in life?
And the short answer is no. I was a BC student really through my sophomore year in college. And I think looking back, I was really young for my grade. So I have a September birthday, and I was really a full year younger.
Oh yeah, that's super young
than everybody in my grade. And so
it's because they bumped you because you showed flashes of genius at a young age.
Well, I'm sure that's the case. But I do think that maturity had something to do with it. But also, I mean, the honest truth is I never really connected what I was learning with something that would do something for me later in life. And I guess maybe I was a little bit bored with it, but I actually have a very vivid recollection of driving in my car one day and thinking to myself, you know what, it's time to kind of flip the switch.
And that was a sophomore year of college?
Probably sophomore year in college. And after that, I did.
And that was at Auburn?
It was at Auburn,
okay.
Yeah, sure was.
Do you mind if I can ask, what years were you at Auburn?
I was 86 to 90.
Was it trying to time, was it the Bo Jackson era? Or was it that right before you?
He had just graduated.
I was going to say, that's not a bad time to be at Auburn, right?
That guy was different. I remember in my freshman year, I was in the grocery store, and he was in front of me, and I was looking at that like, that is different DNA right there. Well, guy's a... You
could argue him and Dion, not just because they were the two guys who played, like, depending on how you define athlete, Bo more powerful, Dion more graceful, I guess, more athletic. Like,
yeah.
But the two greatest athletes I've probably ever seen.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about this, I mean, it's such a shame that he got hurt.
Yeah.
Because it would have been so awesome to see what he could have done. But yeah, you're right. I mean, those two guys were incredible.
So you're driving, you're at Auburn, feeling good, saying, okay, it's time.
Yeah.
It's time to grow up. It's time to flip the switch, as you said.
Yeah. Maybe I do have a recollection of being in a car with my father one day. And, a little sidetrack here. My father grew up with one single parent household, very humble background, lived in a housing project. And we were riding in the car one day, and he was a successful real estate guy, by the way, developer.
Must have been a good dude.
Well, he was a great dude. And I don't know what facilitated this. He said, you need to understand you're never coming to work for me. I thought, well, I hadn't really thought about that, but thank you for sharing that. And I guess it was just a few weeks after that, and I was like, I
was going to say, was this around that time?
It's around that time, and maybe he was looking at my effort in school, and
he said, I need to shock this kid a little bit.
Well, it worked.
It worked.
So maybe that had something to do with it, but also, just what I was learning, like all of a sudden I could see where this could, this really matters. Like understanding this stuff really matters now. And so I, kind of flipped the switch a little bit in school, did a lot better, and really came out. It was always in my mind that I wanted to be successul.
What advice would you have for parents now? Not from the parent perspective, but from you as the kid's perspective. If there's parents out there say, one day I want my son or daughter to grow up to be the CEO of a bank or anything. What advice in terms of your experience with your parents, and you perhaps just touched on a little bit, that increase the probability or set you on a path to kind of be a high achiever in whatever industry you chose? So
what I didn't share with you about my father is he was double promoted when he was younger. And so when he was in the sort of late elementary school, early junior high stage. They advanced him two grades, so he was a really smart guy and made really good grades, and started at Georgia Tech on an engineering scholarship and ended up transferring to Auburn because he met my mom one summer. But he's a really, really smart guy, and what I've always appreciated is the fact that he didn't beat me over the head with it. But I do think that was that moment was kind of like maybe the coaching moment I was telling you about with my son. He was like, I think that was his way of saying, you need to get on with it. Like, you need to get serious about this. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question other than to say, everybody's different. I think from my perspective, it was almost like I was hearing my dad say, you got a lot more that you can do. You need to show some effort.
Is he still around?
No, he passed away over 20 years ago.
I was going to say, was he around long enough to see that slacker kid turn into the CEO?
He was he had passed away before he started Oakworth, but I was you were doing. I was having some pretty good success, and I don't know if we're going to talk about that or not, but so he saw that I had.
Okay, he said, "All right, he'll be all right."
Yeah, he felt. I think all right.
He turned out okay.
That's right.
Is your brother? What is he in banking? What does he do?
He's a CEO of a company also.
Oh wow, okay, so it's in the water.
Yeah, so we actually are co-investors with each other's businesses.
Got it. Okay.
So he runs a company called ABC Polymer, and we actually bought that company out of bankruptcy from another bank that was actually the predecessor to Regions, a bank called AmSouth Bank, and basically walked in and said, "You've got a bad loan here. The company's about to go out of business. We'll step in and keep paying the loan, but we're not going to guarantee it because there's too much risk involved with it. But we think we can make a go of it, and if we do, you've got a good loan and maybe a good client for years to come." And so they agreed to that, sort of shockingly because we were pretty young at the time, and we agreed that my brother would run that business, and so we've been partners in that for almost 30 years.
Maybe they didn't have any other options, or you guys were the only guys crazy enough to pull it off,
probably
right?
Both, actually.
Probably both.
It's probably both.
All right, so the switch flips. What does that look like? How does your life change when one day you wake up and you said, "Okay, these are my words. Time to grow up." Like, what changed in your approach to probably starting with school, and then walk us through getting into the workforce?
So, I am heavily influenced by this idea of being on a team and being on a team that's working together towards a common purpose. And you would recognize that, obviously. That always just meant a ton to me. And, the thought of not being an important part of the success or, at whatever level, really was something that was kind of embedded in me. Like I wanted to be a meaningful part of a team. And business is no different than sports, in my estimation. I think it's almost exactly the same thing. And so I think the idea of really being a contributor, and frankly, I wanted to be the leader of a company. And by the way, just as an aside, I had zero interest in being in banking. In fact, to this day, I say it sort of makes my skin crawl for somebody to refer to me as a banker, because I don't view myself that way. I view myself as a business person who happens to
be in banking. Well, I was going to ask, how do you end up in banking? But I'm sure we'll cover that. But
yeah, I mean, so the advice I got was I shared with my father and other people I respected that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to own my own business one day. And they said, well, you need to get into a spot where you can learn about a lot of different types of businesses. And you can do investment banking, you can do commercial banking. And so I happened to go the commercial banking route. And that was true. I mean, we learned a ton. I learned a ton about, how people make money. And there's all sorts of ways. And I tell you, when you are in a role like that, you get to see a side of society that not many people see. And the old cliche is so true. The guy driving the Ferrari and, with the Armani suits and all that may be all hat and no cattle.
And then the dude who walks into the co-op in overalls could be worth Hundreds of millions.
And I just cannot tell you how many times I have seen that. And so all of that, was just very informative. It turns out that our business, the business that I was in, the banking business, is actually a pretty good business. I mean, like if you run an organization well, the margins can be good. And I love the fact that you actually are a positive input into a lot of other people's business success.
So let me ask real quick. Okay, so first job out of college was where? And you said commercial banking, but like specifically, what did you do?
So I was a trainee for a company called First Alabama Bank, and that was headquartered in Birmingham. And it actually is the predecessor to Regions Financial Corporation.
Okay.
So that was actually a name change. And so in the modern day Regions is the combination of AmSouth Bank and Regions Bank. And the AmSouth team effectively survived that merger. And so it's really more that team now than it is the old Regions team.
And what kind of day-to-day did they have you focusing on as a trainee and then I assume coming out of training?
Yeah, so they rotated us around to the different areas. So I spent time in collections, I spent time in underwriting, I spent time in dealer finance, the retail side of the bank, commercial analysis, really all the different areas.
So you really, as part of the program, you kind of learn holistically, like the entire banking.
That's right.
Experience.
That's exactly right. It was a fantastic way to understand the business.
So you touched on banking actually, and I these could have been the words, but like banking actually can be a pretty good business to be in. Explain to the listener, the layman, how does a bank work? How does it make money?
Yeah, great question. So the basic business of a bank is buying and selling money. And so when we talk about buying money, that's taking deposits in because you think about it simplistically, you put a deposit in a bank, you expect to earn a return for that. And so that's the buying money part of it. The selling money part of it is the opposite.
Lending.
We analyze different real estate deals, we analyze commercial businesses, and what we're looking for is basically a primary and a secondary source of repayment. The primary source of repayment is always cash flow. The secondary source of repayment for senior debt, which is what we do, is some sort of credit enhancement,
collateral,
whether it's collateral, a guarantee, whatever the case may be. So that's basically the business, and we earn our revenue off of the interest spread. So we might, I'm just making these numbers up, we might pay 2% for the deposits that we take in, and we charge 4 or 5% on the money that we sell.
And then what is the amount of the deposits? Let's say you have $1 billion in deposit. What is the amount of deposits the FDIC requires you to keep on hand on any given day?
So there's a difference between deposits and cash in our vernacular. Cash, we manage to about 5% liquidity. So if you think about our deposit book, or really our total asset base at any point in time, we have to maintain a certain amount of access to liquidity, whether it's cash or very liquid investments. And that's really to meet the demands of depositors. And so, I guess simplistically, some people think, well, gosh, they have all that cash sitting in a vault in the building, and that's just not the case. It's all really computer ledger.
Yeah.
And so we have to keep a certain amount of ready access to liquidity just to meet those demands.
Yeah, because that was an issue for a couple banks. Was it, 18 months ago?
Yeah.
Was that 18 months ago?
Yeah, it was. Beginning of
Silicon Valley.
Yeah, beginning of 23.
23,
Yeah.
Signature, First Republic, First Community, I think in New York.
The interesting thing about every one of those banks is they were considered darlings on Wall Street. Every one of them were considered darlings on Wall Street before that happened. And by the way, that's not a new problem. You go back to the S&L crisis, and it was the fallacy of borrowing short and lending really long. In the S&L crisis, it was mortgages. In this case, it was just going long on bonds to stretch for some yield.
Bonds and MBS, right? Like just where your rate that's locked in on these longer term commitments is almost in some cases lower than the amount you have to pay out to keep your deposits.
Well, that's what happened. And of course, in the case of the banks that you mentioned, it was really about mark to market and capital. And so I don't know if you're familiar with mark to market.
And is that like unrealized losses, but you don't have to mark to market because it's it's like the hold to maturity versus it's not a game, but
there's available for sale or
Yes.
held to maturity, and they're treated differently. But basically what happened was investors started looking at the balance sheet, and they're
wait
like,
a minute, you own a lot of 10-year treasuries at 1.9%.
yeah.
What are these worth today? And when all of a sudden depositors, we started Silicon Valley, I think because of just some issues in the tech industry, people were like, hey, we actually need some money. And they're like, oh, now we have to sell these securities that we had, even though, yes, mark to market, they had already lost tremendous value, but it doesn't show up on their balance sheet because they say, well, they're hold to maturity until they're not.
That's right.
And then they had to sell them. There was a significant realized loss. And then people said, well, if they lost that much on this, what does the rest of the portfolio look like?
Right. Yeah. And you know, what triggered that was, Silicon Valley was really exposed to the private equity, investment banking world where, I mean, you know this, it's like a fraternity.
Yeah.
And all those guys know each other. I mean, I had a scenario where a friend of mine had just been a part of a capital raise to put money in. Their money was sitting at Silicon Valley. I'm actually on vacation. He calls me and he says, hey, I need some help. We've got money at Silicon Valley. Can you help me get it out? And I called and we did a little dance there, and it was too late. The FDIC had already come in and frozen everything.
Did they end? Because they did end up guaranteeing it.
The FDIC ended up making everybody whole.
I'm sure there were a couple sleepless nights though.
Oh, God.
For your buddy.
And look, yes, there was. Oh, wait, when you invest in a venture, and this was, it was a venture deal.
Mm-hmm.
So you can lose all of it, but you don't think you might lose your money by putting it in a checking account.
No.
So anyway.
And I think that's the premise of why the government steps in, amongst not just like the contagion issue. But all right, so you're at First Alabama, which becomes Regions for 16 years. And what is that just, every couple of years you're getting promoted and you're just kind of working your way up the ladder, so to speak?
Yeah, and I was really fortunate. I got the opportunity to work in a lot of different areas. So I spent I was very fortunate to be able to run a commercial banking group at a pretty early age. I was about 25 when I started managing a group of about 8 folks. And then I did something completely different and ran the retail network. Totally different business models.
Walk the audience through retail banking. What does that mean?
So retail banking, think of it as just, branch locations on street corners, retail type business. So, a lot of the people that do business with the branches, that happens to be near their house or whatever. And so, it's that kind of interaction with people. Whereas commercial banking is more you're calling on businesses and talking to them about cash flow, that sort of thing. But wow, what a educational experience that is. Again, it was really, for me, it was probably a watershed moment, just learning how to lead people. I went from managing really a team of 8 people to managing about 500 or 600 people.
That's a big one.
And this is where I learned the lesson that I spent a lot of time. So my instruction when I got that job was, congratulations, we need you to completely reorganize this thing. And oh, by the way, I was supposed to give a talk over at this conference in Atlanta. I need you to do that for me instead. And about a topic I knew nothing about.
So you're just thrown into it.
Just thrown into it. But what I learned is I spent an awful lot of time on the plan. I mean, a ton of time on the plan, and I thought it was a great plan. And what I figured out is the plan is only as good as the people executing the plan.
Yeah.
And so pretty quickly it was like, okay, I got to move some pieces of the puzzle around. But it was a really good learning experience. So I did that, and then I spent some time in mergers and acquisitions, merger integration, which, by the way, was where I really it solidified my feeling about how important culture is.
Is the M&A, is that within the bank, you guys gobbling up, or you're saying, okay.
Yeah, so when I started with what was then First Alabama Bank, it was about a $6 billion organization. By the time I left, it was $140 billion. So we did a ton of M&A, hence the name change, by the way.
Yeah.
First Alabama Bank of North Carolina doesn't play very well.
And who were what was the capital behind First Alabama and then obviously all this M&A?
Well, I mean, it was a mixture of a lot of stuff. I mean, we were very profitable, so we were generating a lot of capital. But we certainly did capital raises along the way. And a lot of those, see, the M&A landscape has changed. You used to be able to basically just mash two balance sheets together and there wasn't really any capital implication. That's totally different now. And you could capitalize merger expenses and all that sort of stuff, and you just can't do that now. You have to recognize those as real expenses.
So you're there 16 years. What was the last role you held there before you started Oakworth?
So I was what we called a group president, and it was over a geography that included all the lines of business. So commercial banking, retail banking, mortgage, investments. We used to own a company, which now Raymond James. At the time, it was called Morgan Keegan, and so we had a real investment shop that was a part of that. But that was my role, was to basically lead that geography.
How many times in 16 years, by your count, were you promoted or elevated within the organization?
That's a great question. I have to think about that for a second. Don't hold me to this.
No,
number,
I was going to say plus or minus.
7, maybe.
7 times in 16 years. And that's kind of the lead in to my question or kind of topic I want to just sit on for a minute. So you started 22, 23 years old at the bank, 16?
22.
16 years, promoted 7 times. So obviously just, pretty consistently growing and getting higher up in the organization. All right, is the best way to put it. What was your work-life balance like at the time? Like what was the lifestyle in terms of your kind of commitments professionally, and then how did that kind of work with whatever commitments you had in your personal life?
Right. It was a juggling act. I mean, basically, I'm big on exercise, so I felt like that needs to be a part of my day. So, and it just wasn't going to happen if I didn't do it really early in the morning. So, I would get up, I'd exercise really early.
What time would you get
come
up?
Back, probably 5.
5. So and exercise, is that going to the gym? Is that going outside for a run? Or
But both.
Okay.
Both. A little bit of both. Would do that, come back. I wanted to be there for my kids when they left for school.
You got married and had kids pretty young then?
No, I got married when I was 27. And so, starting out, I had no responsibility family-wise. So it was, get to work.
Well, let's touch on that, because there are, especially more so now generationally than our generation, especially in the South, right? But there's a lot of 22-year-olds starting out in their profession, regardless of the industry, who don't have those commitments at home, right?
Right.
Not everybody, but I'd say most. And so what did your professional commitment look like from 22 to 26, 27 before the first?
That's actually a really good point. I'll tell you a little funny story about how times have changed. So when I first started, I didn't realize this. So we were offered a salary, but we were filling time cards out for some reason. I didn't realize why we were doing that, and it had to do with a lot of stuff. But anyway, but I was pretty focused, and so I was getting to work at 6, and
6 a.m.
6 a.m. and
you
then
hear that, audience? 6 a.m.
So would get there early, and I was just working until the work was done, and so there were pretty long days, and I was filling my time card out. Like I just filled out when I got there.
12, 13 hours a day.
Something like that. And the HR guy comes in.
Say, hey, what are you doing?
And he was like, hey, you understand you need to fill out 8 o'clock is your arrival time, an hour for lunch, and 5 o'clock departure. Got it? I was like, yes, sir. Got it. Didn't change what I did, but I mean, I just started filling that out. And
now, question, is that because of actual HR legal issues, or is that because they didn't want you to make other people look bad?
I think it was more about the HR issues, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We had other people in that.
Turns out the starting salary and 14 hours a day, you're making less than like minimum wage.
It probably had more to do. It probably, they were worried about labor laws and
that's
stuff
what I'm
like
saying.
that.
Well, I don't know if there were any back then. No, but I'm always so fascinated. Anytime I have the opportunity to interview people, so many, on this podcast are at the top of their profession, like yourself in banking. And I love to ask the question, like, what was your life like when you started your career? And I don't think we've had one who said like, well, it was pretty balanced and pretty normal. And, so yeah, it's like, we're like 35 for 35, I think. So 12, 13 hours a day, even in banking, which, I'd say probably that's not as common as maybe like, let's say like an investment banker in New York City.
That's right.
But, and so then you had your first kid. How old were you?
Oh gosh. Man, you put me on the spot here. I was 30.
30.
When we had our first child.
Okay. So you had a good run of, focusing on the career. So probably had a lot of momentum, but how did your life change when that first kid came? And we were kind of diving into that as like, you had to work out in the morning and then get back to the kid.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I wanted my children to see me around.
Mm-hmm.
And so my logic was go knock that out before anybody wakes up, get back, be there, at least to see them up for a minute. And that way they know I'm there. And then I really wanted to be there at their events and stuff like that. So as they got older and started playing sports and doing all that sort of stuff, I would kind of kept the same routine, and I would go to that stuff. And if I wasn't done, I'd either work at home or I'd go back to the office and just kind of do it. And by the way, during all that was when we were starting the company.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of leading into is after 16 years at Regions, first Alabama to Regions, and then 2007.
Yeah.
And opened in March of 2008, which the irony of the timing is not lost on me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you questions about that. You decided, in addition to while you're building a family, I'm going to go out and start a bank.
Yeah.
What led you to that? Like, what was the catalyst? What was the driver? Was there a moment where you said, you know what, I think I should do this?
Yeah. So I used to tell my wife that when I was at Regions that I feel like I loved the company. I loved the people I work with. But I used to tell her, I feel like an entrepreneur trapped inside a large company. But like any good organization, they had done a pretty good job of creating sort of a difficult decision financially to walk away.
They made you, it's like so comfortable that it was tough to leave, but they could never really fill that itch, that need of like a true entrepreneur.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So financially, the catalyst was when Regions and AmSouth merged. I was fortunate enough to have a change of control agreement, and even though technically Regions acquired AmSouth, it was deemed a reverse merger because the executive team from AmSouth really survived the merger, and so it triggered the change of control. And so what that in effect did is it created an opportunity for me financially to say, okay, well, it's possible for me to walk away and do something. And I got to say, I mean, to have an awesome wife is so huge. I mean, I remember walking in, Robin is my wife's name, and I remember walking in, I had a really good job even after the merger and all that. And I said, I think I've got to leave.
And you had, what, 2 or 3 little kids at the time?
3 children, young children. And I said, the deal is I will make no money probably for a year. And it's an idea. Like, I've got to pursue this idea. And she was like, go for it.
No hesitation.
No hesitation. I've sort of joked, I'm not sure she really realized how risky that was, but she was awesome. I mean, she said I had all the confidence in the world in you, and so that was huge. And
she was locked in on the conversation. It wasn't one of those like you're talking to her and she's not paid. She's like, yeah, that sounds great, honey. Whatever you do, I support you. But like she's watching a show or something. She was locked in.
No, she was locked in. It was a big deal to everybody. in our family. And so I just cannot overstate how awesome that was, how great that is, and has continued to be.
And so, okay, what happens? Like, I'm going to start a bank. Like, what's the first thing you do?
Well, you have to have an idea of what your business is going to be. And I was fortunate that we had done a lot of work with where we create and destroyed value at regions. And so I had a really good idea of where the real profit was generated. And so really the idea was, gosh, if you just had a clean sheet of paper, why not just focus on those areas?
Things, yeah.
And that was the premise of it. And then of course we fleshed it out. And I'll tell you, a watershed moment was we went to Chicago, and there was a company called the Private Bank who I had studied pretty extensively, and they were basically a trust group combined with a a private bank. And we really felt like the commercial component was really important. So we go up there and we meet with them. And by the way, they had done very well for their shareholders. We went up and met with them, had a great conversation with them, and it became apparent to us that it wasn't quite as integrated as you sort of saw on the website and all that sort of stuff. That was clear. But the other is they were beginning to understand that the commercial piece was important. So we left that meeting in Chicago. It was me and a couple other of our founders, and we were sort of high-fiving at the airport. We were like, we're on to something. Like if we can find the right group, this business model will work. So we knew what we were going to do. We had a plan for what we were going to do. And then we just had the small matter of recruiting the talent and raising the capital and getting started. And that's about a year-long process, by the way.
And so before we get to surviving the GFC and then scaling the business, I guess, what was the main motivation or driver? What was your why for that first phase of your career from 22 to 37, kind of working your way up at First Alabama and Regions? Like what got you up at 5 a.m. to go to work, outside of just, needing a job and making money, but like, what was like kind of your fuel? What was your driver?
To be honest with you, I wanted to be the CEO. I mean, I had a bullseye on that.
Why?
I just maybe it goes back to wanting to be a really important part of a winning team. I don't know. I really don't know how to. Do
you think like living up to, maybe the standards your dad set as well? Because it sounds like he was very successfil in real estate.
Absolutely. There's no question that there's always
like legacy.
No doubt. I mean, I've had this. I have no idea where this came from, but I've always had this kind of thought. I sort of had this mental image of where he started in the business world and where he ended. And I've always kind of had this thought that I'm not worth my salt if I don't travel at least that distance or greater. And so, that probably had a lot to do with it, to be honest with you.
Do you think, I know you're not speaking for your brother, it sounds like your brother's obviously very successful. Do you think that same applies?
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, I know it does because we've talked about it before.
Yeah, it's, I don't know if it's legacy or expectations or standards, probably all thrown in together.
Absolutely.
But I talk to people about pressure and expectations, and I said, so many people focus on those things as negatives, like just the pressure is going to get to them. And I don't want them to like these expectations that are placed on people, and there can be downsides to that.
Sure.
But there's also upsides, which is it can get you out of bed in the morning.
Absolutely. And I remember it from the time I can remember that my father was talking to me about stuff like this. He would say stuff like, you're going to do things I could never dream of. Like you're going to have opportunities that I can't even fathom right now. And that always just kind of stuck with me. Like, my dad believes in me and it's possible.
And it's almost like, it sounds like if it didn't happen, it's like, what did you do?
Right.
Yeah. Not that it was a certainty, but it's like, no, you're going to be able to do things that where if you end up not doing those things, it's, you got lost along the way.
You know what? I mean, this is not really your question, but what does occur to me is I have met so many people that are way smarter than I am, but they just don't go for it. I mean, it's amazing how the biggest part of it is just get started. I don't know if you've seen that in your career, but it's amazing to me how many people have all the capability in the world, but they just, for whatever reason, they just decide not to start.
Yeah, I'll use a football analogy. Shocker. I was texting with a guy, Troy Polamalu.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, hey, any advice for my son? My son and I were driving in the car, and I was texting with Troy and about football, and he said, football is a simple game. It's about overcoming the fear of injury and the fear of failure, right? And that actually applies to business. Now, not injury, but financial injury, like you got to go for it. You start your own bank, right? Just start your own real estate brokerage company. And there is a fear of financial injury, like, what if it doesn't work? But also a fear of failure, which is kind of more of an optical failure in the eyes of people that you care about or whose opinions you care about. And so many people, in my opinion, and I want to hear yours, of course, is they don't take that shot because of those two things. Like, well, what if I fail? Like financially, that could be bad. And I think you should quantify that, but you'll probably be okay. You could always gone back to another bank, certainly, and then a fear of failure, which is probably a bigger driver, which is like the opposite. Like, well, I don't want people to think or know that I did something and failed, and I think that keeps a lot of people, to your point, from not going for it. What do you think?
I totally agree with that. It's not exactly the same, but it reminds me of just, probably every coach in America says this, but it's you're going to experience pain one way or the other. It's either the pain of preparation or the pain of regret.
Yeah.
And I think the pain of regret deal for me was pretty powerful. Like the idea of never pursuing something that, man, I had talked about it a lot, and I really it was deep inside me. But
yeah, it's a super powerful driver.
Yeah.
And touching on there's going to be pain. We have a saying here, choose your hard life. No matter what you choose is going to be hard. So either don't start, don't take your shot, don't go for it, and you're going to live with the hard life of having regret and be like, man, I wish I did. Or you choose your hard life, you actually go start your own business, and it's hard, right? So let's talk about starting a business and it being hard. You might be the only person on the planet who started a bank in 2007 and opened in 2008. What was that like?
I don't know if that is exactly true, but what I do know is we were the last charter issued for several years, heading into the Great Recession. Mm-hmm. And so it was good in a lot of respects in that we were a balance sheet that was super clean.
I was going to say, if you started 2 or 3 years before, it probably would have been tough.
Right, probably so. And you had, I've always said I'd rather be lucky than good. So we were raising capital, say, from October of 2007 through March of 2008. And so if you remember, through March of 2008, everything was still pretty good in people's eyes.
When did it go? Well,
sort of midsummer was when it's
was
like,
when Lehman went down. Was it July or September? Bear went down in June of 2008. So yeah, it was right before the chaos.
Right, it was right, and so
maybe what Countrywide had failed by then, but it still was like, maybe that's isolated.
Well, from our perspective, in hindsight, people still felt good. They had money. And we sort of joked we were a hero to a lot of people because we raised $37 million roughly, mm-hmm. and the people that put money into Oakworth had generally taken it out of the market to put it into Oakworth, and so we sort of joked we just made you 100% return because you didn't lose half your money.
Because you didn't lose any of it. Yeah,
exactly. So, and we said from the very beginning, what we're up to is not a blow the balance sheet up and sell it kind of play. It's a build a lasting business. And so we've got very patient shareholders. But people had money. And so and that's just another thing that just never occurred to us. Like I was 38 at the time. It never occurred to me that we wouldn't raise the capital. Of course, that's stupid not for that not to occur to me. But
sometimes ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah. I mean, so I will say this though, I had deep belief in the team that we had put together.
And did you bring a lot of those teammates from your previous place?
Some, but not many. We certainly there's some key ones. I would say Sam Scalisi, one of our founders and now our COO. We've actually known each other all our lives, but we had worked together.
He knows where the bodies are buried.
He knows where the bodies are buried. We have this.
He's got some photos of you in high school.
We have this mutual self-destruct, destruction pact, But so him, a guy named John Norris, who runs our wealth, our investment management function, and a brilliant guy. He was there. But beyond, and we had maybe a couple of others, but beyond that, it was really a good cross-section of people from a lot of different organizations.
And then how did the scaling going? I mean, how did that, it's been, let's call it a little over 15 years now. You raised $37 million. What were some of the practical drivers to the bank's growth?
Well, I've always said it's building a brand is just hard work. I remember going out and talking to people that I had done business with. And because I had a different business card with a different logo on it, it was just a totally different conversation. And nobody would ever say this, but what you could tell is, I'm going to wait and see if this actually works. And that makes it really difficult to get started because we sort of joked, the one question when you're talking to somebody about investment management that almost invariably comes up is, and how much money are you managing right now? Like, what's the size of your assets under management? And when it's zero, that's a hard question to answer.
In brokerage, you go, honestly, man, it's such a fluid number. It's kind of so big, it's hard to quantify that. I could tell you, I lost count.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, there are a lot of creative ways to dodge a question for sure. And,
that's right.
And we had some of them. Probably.
All right, I love asking this question. Who gets to pick the name? Oakworth.
Do you want the real answer? Or do you want the by the way, the name of the company and the logo were the two hardest things we did. Writing the business plan, doing everything else was a piece of cake compared to that. So the marketing spin, and then I'll get to the real reason. The marketing spin is it represents strength, longevity, all that stuff.
Black Rock, Oak Tree, Gray Star.
Yeah, exactly. All that stuff. The actual real answer to it is we couldn't come up with a name, but we were literally sitting around in a circle. It was like 7 or 8 of us, and we're like, we got to have a name to turn the application in. Like, you have to have a name. So we got to come up with something. And I said, I have no idea if this will be helpful or not, but I'll tell y'all that years ago, I was sitting with my father talking about what if I started a bank one day. And we happened to be sitting at the Oak Bar in the Plaza Hotel in New York talking about this. Wow. And my father made the comment. He said, well, if you ever did, you'd have to include Oak in the name. And I just shared that with everybody.
Listen, Oak, obviously strong wood, prosperity tree, but
yeah,
that story is awesome.
Yeah. So I shared that, and everybody's like, heck yeah, man, we got to figure out a way. And then there's just
let's find a kind of a tag. Worth's good. Yeah, it means like money, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's where it came from. By the way, just as an aside, if you ever think you have an original thought or idea, Google it.
Yeah.
And it's been thought of.
I'll tell you, I got lucky, obviously, just the company Matthews, that was easy. But Matthews.com, we looked it up, when we started this thing, and it was available. That was like my best buy,
That's awesome.
A simple domain.
So we had just a little side story about Oakworth. So we're Oakworth.com now. We weren't when we first started. We were OakworthCapital.com. And the reason we weren't Oakworth.com is because there is an Oakworth unpainted furniture out in California. And they had purchased the domain Oakworth.com. And so we called them and said, hey, can we buy this? And they're like, sure. A couple $100,000.
Oh, gee.
So we're
see, they're from California. It's probably a business, probably somebody living in their parents' basement. Who was just squatting on a website.
That's exactly what it was.
So how many people are at Oakworth today?
That number changes pretty frequently, but roughly 160 right now.
Okay, and I don't know how many offices. I guess I'll ask how many branch locations, or like how do you measure the size of a bank?
Yeah, so normally you refer to the size of a bank in terms of total assets.
That's right.
But we have 4 different offices. So we're headquartered in Birmingham. We have an office in Mobile, Alabama. We call that our South Alabama office. An office here in Nashville, and then an office in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Earlier you said, your driver in kind of the building phase of you're still building, but that first Alabama to Regions of 16 years was you said, I want to be the CEO one day, right?
Right.
Then you become the CEO. How is your motivation? How has your why evolved? What is it today?
It is really about watching people develop. I mean, yes, we're in business to provide for our shareholders, of course, but our thought, and I strongly believe this, that becomes a byproduct of making the right decisions, doing the right thing over and over and over. And, we try to make Oakworth a phenomenal place for people to build a career. And man, is it gratifying to see people supporting their families and being able to take vacations and, pay for children's activities and all that stuff as a byproduct of building a successful business. And so I really feel like a big part of my job is maintaining the culture and really driving and enhancing the culture over time so that we can be a positive input to society. I mean, that sounds kind of lofty, but man, jobs are such a huge thing in communities. And, if you really start talking to people about what enables them to live the kind of life they want to live, it's what they do professionally. And so that's what drives me now. Now, I'd be lying if I mean, we've got a big goal of becoming an iconic brand. That's become, I'll say for me, I believe for a lot of our folks, that's become the North Star. Like, can we build a world-class organization that people look at it and say, wow, that's the gold standard?
If you had to quantify that, how much in deposits would, hit the measure of an iconic brand in banking? You're talking like JP Morgan size? Like what?
That
10 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion?
I would say, I tell you, I've learned a hard lesson. When I throw a number out there, our associates really lock down on it. And that can be great, and it can also be a challenge.
Throw a big one then.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we set out a 10-year plan in September of 21, and we said, scale is an important part of becoming an iconic brand. And we really sort of just pulled a number out of the air and said, look, what about 10x the size of the company in 10 years? And so that's been kind of the rallying
cry. What was it
at
the time?
So we were roughly $1 billion in assets. Okay. And so, and we're roughly, let's see, what were we in wealth assets? We were about 1.8 billion in assets. So we said we wanted to be 10 billion on the bank side and about 18 billion on the wealth side. Knowing full well that, a 10-year plan is never going to work out exactly, but I'll tell you, it did motivate our folks.
It's like that Elon Musk strategy. He just say, hey, he's throwing it way up here.
Right.
Sometimes you get there, but even, what is that saying? Even if you shoot for the moon, if you miss, you're amongst the stars.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are some big goals. Yeah. Earlier you talked about you're more, today your driver kind of in paraphrasing is watching people grow and succeed so that they can live the life they want to live. What in your opinion what have been the most consistent characteristics of individuals, that you worked with in your previous work and now within the Oakworth organization? What have been the most consistent characteristics or traits or behaviors for those who really have grown in their careers and those who are putting themselves in a position to live that life?
This may sound a little bit silly, but I think the ones that really view leadership from a servant's perspective, it's like my job is to position other people for success. It's just amazing how they end up being really successful. And I think people that not just sort of say that stuff, but their actions really back that up. It just and if you've read any business books, that's all in there. I mean, it's but I really my observation is the people that are genuinely interested in the development of it's like the coach you were talking about. He genuinely wanted you to develop as a player. You felt that. You knew that was sincere, and it brought the best out in you. People are like that. And the right kind of people are like that. So those types of leaders I see be really successful.
Yeah, with the men and women who go into our new management training, new leadership training, that's one of the lines we have is like, look, if you want to experience success in leadership and really in any professional setting, by serving others, you can serve yourself. Like their success is the definition of your success. And so you have to have a servant's heart. And by serving others, you are, which is okay, selfishly serving yourself, but you have to go in knowing that.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm going to ask the same question in reverse. What has been the biggest, or what have been the biggest characteristics or behaviors of people you've worked alongside with, or people who've worked for you that haven't achieved success or didn't make it? What's the common theme there?
Not to be too easy about this, but it's the reverse of that, is selfishness. Because I think people are smart. People diagnose that fairly quick, and that doesn't inspire anybody. And I've always, if you've ever run across somebody who is arrogant, they almost naturally want to throw their resume at you or their accomplishments at you, but ultimately it has the opposite impact of what they want to have happen. And so I think selfish leaders are very much like that. They're pretty transparent about it being about them, and it almost has the reverse effect that they're looking for.
How would you describe to the audience, how would you describe your mindset or your mentality as it relates to your approach to your professional success?
My wife probably would agree with this.
I probably should ask her, but yeah.
I tend to not let go of something. And so I guess the outward expression of that is I can be pretty tenacious about what I'm pursuing. And
what about perceived slights? Like, where do you hold on to those where you're like, this boss, he doesn't think I'm good at this, or like, do you manufacture things in your head to give you motivation? Like,
sure.
Like Michael Jordan in The Last Dance,
Yeah, I mean, that's probably, I'm probably not supposed to do that, but yeah, of course I
whatever
do.
works.
I mean, I have moments where maybe I perceived, or maybe somebody even told me I didn't measure up for one reason or the other.
I bet off the camera you could write down the name, the date, the place, the time.
100%, 100%. But I can get pretty locked in on something and just pursue it, and I think that can be bad.
You say almost like a manic, like when you get locked in, it's like a manic obsession to achieving that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm being honest with myself, there's some of that there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got really great partners at Oakworth, and we've got this, this team dynamic where we can just be really honest with each other, and that's come out. I mean, I've heard that from some of my partners, and it comes with some really good results, and it comes with some bad side effects too. And so they're nice enough, they care enough to point those out to me when that happens.
But the ends justify the means. You're like, hey, just level with me, hit me with it.
Yeah,
then
that's right.
You're like, ooh, okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So what does the future look like? I mean, obviously 10xing and scaling, but outside of just growing Oakworth into that iconic brand, what else is important to you in your life at this point?
Well, family is a huge part of it. Trying my best to model the kind of behaviors that I want out of my children. And
how old are they?
I've got a 25-year-old who is married, recently married this past year. And then I have twins who are 17 months younger than he is. Daughter who is an apparel designer who lives in Dallas, and a son who is living in Birmingham working for an investment bank.
So you're an empty nester?
I'm an empty nester.
Are you getting back in the office at 6 a.m. now?
No, I'm actually.
Come on, you're getting soft.
But I will say this: what I've learned about my schedule is we've got a number of people that are in the office early. If I'm sitting in my office, I get the, "Hey, you got a minute?"
Yeah, I know.
And so what
I know.
So you get that. And so actually what I do is I actually start work at the same time.
Zach has no boundaries. I could be in the middle of a meeting and he just walks in like lingering,
Only way to get a hold of you, man.
I know, this is true. Sometimes you're like, I got to work from home, not because I don't, because I have to like focus I don't want to sound boring, like paperwork or detailed things where I was like, and I have no discipline where if someone comes in, like the Excel, come in, what's up, and
same, absolutely. But by the way, I love that stuff. I mean,
it's fun.
It's a lot more fun than a lot of the stuff I do at 6 a.m. But so what I do, and I've actually shared this with my our leadership team, is that I may not be sitting at my desk at 6 a.m., but you can text, call, email, whatever, because I'm working. So I still start early. It's just in a different
still exercising.
Routine. Still exercising. I actually do it after work now, though. Oddly enough, it's kind of a stress relief for me.
Yeah.
And what I found is I'm just a better morning person, man. I can knock stuff out early a.m. You're not old yet, but I'm getting there.
Yeah, I'm getting old. I got a lot of miles on these tires. All right.
What I've learned is I'm a lot sharper in the morning, and so I just throw off stress in the afternoon.
I hear you. And also one of the things I was going to touch on, you had is it the Reed Gastrointestinal Research Foundation, which is something you spent some time on?
Yeah, that's a labor of love for me. So you asked about my father.
Yeah. That's
how we lost my dad, was pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, that's a bad one.
It's a tough one. And, so I'll tell you just a funny story. This is, it's weird how some things stick with you. So when I was like in second grade, maybe, my brother came home. He was 2 classes ahead of me. And he talked about getting picked on at school. And my father he was pretty hard-nosed. And he looked at my brother and he said, "Look, I don't ever want to hear about you starting a fight. But if somebody starts a fight with you,
make sure to finish it.
You finish it."
Yeah.
And that's stuck with me literally with everything I've ever done. And in fact, the event that we hold is called the Finish the Fight event. But we started a cancer research foundation in his honor, and we support patient care, education, and research. And so pancreatic cancer is a really tough one, but GI cancers in general are really sort of underserved.
You feel like there's progress being made?
Slow, really slow.
It's wild.
Pancreatic cancer is, really, you do the math on it, it's all about funding, which is why we did GI cancer as opposed to just
because
pancreatic.
It's a wider funnel.
It affects a lot more people, and that was actually so I've become really, my father's doctor has become one of my best friends, which is, I think, probably pretty unique. But he sort of guided the direction of it. But we raised money for that. And, it's just a way to feel like you're doing something.
Sure.
So that's been around.
Well, you are doing something.
Yeah.
And it's not a cliche, something very meaningful. And, speak about legacy. It was obviously a professional legacy that's important to everybody, but it's a bigger one.
Well, what's ended up happening, which we didn't anticipate, is you can imagine over 20 years how many people have been impacted by that. I cannot tell you how many phone calls I've received from one guy I graduated high school with. Called me up one day and said, "Man, my wife just found out she's got colon cancer. What'd I do?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, let me connect you with Marty Hesselin, who's the doctor." And if you've ever had to deal with something like that, you know, getting into the medical arena is sort of like a maze, and it's frustrating. And I mean, literally, Marty picked the phone up, called him, said, "Hey, I got an appointment for your wife tomorrow. Come in and see us."
That's awesome.
Got all the docs to see her, got a plan in place. And so we've been able to do a lot of stuff like that, you know, you really see the impact of it. And that's hugely gratifying.
I'll wrap this up. Let me ask you, what advice would you have? It could be general, it could be specific, but what advice would you have for the professionals, the entrepreneurs, just anyone really listening, that in your opinion can help them, you know, kind of increase the probabilities they get to where they want to go in life?
Well, this is timely because we're trying to develop our younger generation at our company. And what I tell them is we're going to do everything we can to expose you to the right types of education and experiences that you need to get ready to take the next step. But that really is not enough. I said, you know, read books, take classes, volunteer for projects. You've got to take ownership of your advancement in your career. And it's funny you talk about the work-life balance. I think it's achievable, but the reality is you're going to have to spend more hours of the day doing stuff. You can't just start at 8 and end at 5 and expect for all that stuff to fall into place. You're going to have to do stuff outside of work hours to get yourself prepared to take on the next responsibility, whatever that is, whether it's starting a business or taking the next step inside a company. And I listened to a couple of your podcasts, and I've listened to a lot of them about this.
I appreciate that.
It's good stuff.
Hopefully gave me some 5 stars on there. Right?
Absolutely, yes. I just think this idea of, you know, it's effort. It is effort. I think, you know, I love my kids. I think they're bright kids, but there are a lot of bright people in the world, and you really, to some degree, don't control that. But what you can control is your work ethic.
Hell yeah!
And so that's my advice: is to work hard.
So I tell my kids all the time. I said the only thing I care about is the effort. Everything else, you know, effort and success tend to be correlated, but there's certain things that are outside of your control. But effort is the only one that will never be outside your control.
Absolutely.
Well, I had a great time today, Scott. I appreciate you making the drive up. I'm gonna have to come down and check out your offices down in Birmingham. But thanks for coming to Nashville. This was great. This was outstanding. Congrats on all your success thus far and 10xing Oakworth over the next 7-8 years. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for having me.
No, this was
really
great. Thank you.
Enjoy the conversation.
Good seeing you.